Before the video starts, I want to remind everyone that Black Lives Matter. As obvious as that is, and perhaps tiresome to hear, we live in a time where this really needs to be reiterated. I won't engage with arguments to the contrary, and hopefully YouTube won't terminate me for saying it. Black Lives Matter. And this video is to celebrate and promote the generous developers who have donated their games to the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund and the Community Bail Fund. I encourage everyone to do their own research, but find ways to support these causes and raise awareness. Thanks for watching. As you're no doubt aware if you've clicked this video, the indie game marketplace itch.io released an unprecedented bundle of over 1,700 games, soundtracks, experimental projects, and more, combining the work of nearly 1,400 creators and teams. $9,000 of value, all for the starting price of only $5. Now, by the time you're watching this video, there's no time left to buy this insane bundle, but 100% of the proceeds went directly to the organizations I mentioned before in support of racial justice and equality. I know we all have way too much in our backlogs anyway, but so many indie devs came out and donated their games for charity, so do them a favor and consider supporting them back. If you've never played Celeste, Oxenfree, 2064 Read-Only Memories, Nuclear Throne, Overland, One Shot, Octodad, Piku Niku, A Short Height, Night in the Woods, Minute, Diaries of a Spaceport Janitor, Anodyne, holy moly, what are you waiting for? Stop the video and come back, because I'm not talking about any of those games. Because chances are you're one of the 800,000 people who have contributed. Thanks for doing that, by the way. And you're probably too scared to scroll through 57 pages of indie games that you've never heard of. But let your old pal, Janitor Joey, be your guide and highlight some of the games that caught my eye. Now, I barely had time to try most of the games that I wanted to. I found at least 42 games that I'm genuinely interested in or I know are worth picking up. Over a $400 value with many awesome experimental games, in-development games, multiplayer or co-op games, or genre games I don't gravitate to like sim, tactics, dating, visual novels, horror, and more. The number of games I actually downloaded is closer to 70, so there's a lot of cool stuff in here, and I could probably not spend a cent on games for a few years after this. That said, there's a lot of chaff in here as well. Awesome games like Super Meat Boy, Binding of Isaac, and Slime Song? Oh, just the OST. Simple game jam games, lots of tabletop RPGs and storytelling games, which are cool, but not what I was paying for, and like packs of game assets and sprite templates. This one is the third one listed on the page, for crying out loud. For every Celeste, you've got 30 throw cubes into brick towers to collapse them. No, really, that's the name of this one. Personally, I'm more of a Super Bernie World fan myself, but I digress. Here was my journey through the Racial Justice Bundle. Wheels of Aurelia is a funky little number. Good art direction and an excellent soundtrack with a banger of a theme song. The game has you take the wheel on the coastal roads of Italy in the 70s as the firebrand Layla. The dialogue was fun, but nothing special in my first run. The fun was trying to split my attention between driving like a madman and making interesting choices. It would have been cluttered, but I think I would have preferred an Oxenfree style dialogue tree to see my options at a glance instead of scrolling. Layla is a very progressive protagonist, and I assume the entire narrative leans that way as well. I felt really out of time and place. The story nails the era, but feels prohibitively Italian. I just have no idea where any of these cities are in relation to each other, or how accurate the scenery is, or who any of these names are, teams are, cars are, politicians, events, etc. There's a charm to being dropped into the middle of so many characters' lives, and the game intentionally requires multiple playthroughs to really understand most of the story, but in a uniquely foreign film way. More games should have you make dialogue choices while doing other actions. It would be annoying if leaned on too much, but because the game has no real fail states or consequences for driving poorly, I never had to sacrifice making a dialogue choice to focus my attention elsewhere, which would have made for a tense decision. The portraits are great, but the cars and environments are a little bland. I found the experience slightly more engaging than your typical light novel, but worth booting up for that music alone. Wheels of Aurelia! I really enjoy the art style of Knights of the Card Table and dig the central gimmick of an even more simplified version of Dicey Dungeons. It has a similar writing style as well, but some might be put off by the internet speak and modern cartoon tone. The progression ultimately seems pretty slow and shallow, with a lot of either steamrolling with no resistance, or hard RNG walls if the dice and cards aren't in your favor. There's initially very little you can do to mitigate risk or strategize, and a lot of runs just come down to hoping for good coin flips and generous item drops. The aesthetic and variety are lacking compared to Dicey, with mostly mundane enemy types with few variations. The weapons and power-ups are also less creative to match the suburban landscape, but with room to get wilder and more fantastical in the later stages. it's just hard to get invested because there's so many levels, and rarely do they pose a good balance of challenge. The music is also terribly repetitive, and not that enjoyable to listen to for longer than an hour. More permanent stat increases would be nice because the early game health pool is so low that one dud dice roll can take away a third of your total health, making more risky strategies and smaller combo weapons less viable. Unless you're one-shotting something, it feels pretty hard to recover. They try to mix it up with cards whose position can't be shuffled, range cards that attack only at a certain distance, and more customization for classes and armor and such. It made the experience mildly more enjoyable by virtue of not worrying as much about missing my rolls, but with extra hearts the game is even more laughably easy. The flip side are the daily challenges and 30+ floor gauntlets, which thankfully keep your regression on death, but then it's just a war of attrition with endless baddies who can potentially one-shot you in certain cases. It's kind of all or nothing, which is the only way to make a primarily dice-rolling game even the littlest bit exciting. And once you know what you're doing, waiting for the animations and cards to reshuffle takes way too long. Still, a polished and cute little game that's worth checking out if you like the aesthetic and don't mind an easy grind. Now this one was more of a laid-back puzzler than I initially anticipated from the screenshots. Fossil Hunters features light exploration and collecting, with digging reminiscent of a top-down SteamWorld dig. The goal is to dig around randomly until you find the right dino pieces to fit into a grid on each floor, or that meets the specifications of your benefactor's requests. It's a cute concept, but it's also held back a bit by its simplicity and randomness. Sometimes you're really lucky and dig up the necessary components immediately, and it's as simple as slapping them together and moving on, while other times are a grueling slog of mindless surveying, hoping in vain to unearth the last skull, spine, or toenail for your mixed-up monstrosity. What's fun in concept is making your own unethical abominations and donating them for sweet cash, but you're also limited by what you happen to find, and without time limits or direction, it feels like a pointless distraction. There's a bit of risk when clearing large areas because the ceiling slowly collapses and can crush you and any fossils you weren't able to move to safety, but it's only a slight annoyance. There are also journals and hidden treasures scattered around each site which offer cute tidbits of lore and additional challenges, but these can also feel like fluff content since treasure tends to just unlock different treasure. The only challenge is just wasting your time, from journals buried in hard-to-find patches of dirt taunting you to dig up every block, to babysitting these munchers that eat your fossils or clearing these multiplying mushrooms. There are power-ups that boost your digging speed or strength when moving fossils, but you lose them when you die. That just meant riding the lift back up to the floor, running to get the power-up again, and coming back down because digging faster is so crucial. It wasn't really much of a choice, but it added a few minutes of backtracking every time I died, which was irritating. The main theme is bombastic and catchy as hell, but the loop is unbearably short and loses its luster pretty quick. Despite my gripes, I actually did enjoy this one. It felt like revisiting a fond game from my childhood as an adult. I could see myself replaying Fossil Hunters endlessly as a kid and making complex skeletal chimeras, but for now, it's more of a chill-out, nostalgic game. Plucked straight from the 80s, Curse of the Crescent Isle DX is a classic homage to 8-bit platformers, warts and all. While the closest comparison would probably be Super Mario Bros. 2, Crescent Isle pulls from a lot of different molds, including Mega Man, Zelda 2, and even Shantae on the Game Boy. You take control of either the king or queen of an island kingdom and are tasked with ridding the warlock's curse that's transformed your citizens into weird platformer enemies. Also, the princess is gone. Big surprise. The art style really stood out for me on this one, and while it's certainly on the simplistic side with less than stellar detail in the environments and level design, there's a surprising amount of effort put into the animations. It doesn't always look that impressive, but I appreciate the small details like how vines sway, slimes jiggle, and there's a considerable thud and dust cloud when falling from high enough. It gives the visuals a lot of extra character and not feel like stock assets. I just wish the developer had stuck closer to the tried and true platforming controls because Crescent Isle feels a little stiff. There's no momentum when running and jumping, and it can be a little demanding, bordering on getting over it levels of one missed jump losing you tons of progress. Look, I get what the design was here, I jumped to freeze these fireballs, but they're too high to jump on unless I stand right next to the launcher and jump in anticipation of it shooting. Twice! Thankfully you don't take damage from falls or missing your timing here, but I was stuck for nearly 20 minutes, and many expletives were shouted. It feels Mario Maker-esque sometimes in an amateurish way, with just things scattered about and shooting without much rhyme or reason. But I don't want to be too negative because I think the game has a lot of good ideas and mechanics. A major component of gameplay is an expanded implementation of the Mario 2 enemy grabbing. Not only can you ride, pick up, and throw enemies, but they ricochet back when you land a hit for rapid attacks, and several enemies offer unique puzzle-solving and movement options. You can drill holes in 4 directions in Pogo, or slide and freeze bodies of water, or play VVV on these skull guys. These were fun to discover and more forgiving than the normal running and jumping. The bosses so far also incorporate these techniques and were decent enough challenges. The music is fun and reminiscent of Cave Story, which is a huge compliment, but the sound effects are dreadful. Mix this awful vine climbing noise with a dozen overlapping fireball farts, and the results are just unpleasant, to say the least. A quick and dirty 2D platformer with some charming good ideas. It's worth a shot if you've got some patience. This is apparently a brand new game that I hadn't even heard about, but Signs of the Sojourner is a really polished gem that I'm excited to gush about. The game is essentially a visual novel, choose-your-own-adventure dialogue-driven game with some light store management and quests. But the real hook is the deck-building dialogue minigame. Kinda like... Sojourner found a really fun way to spice up conversations in a video game by simulating a conversation using the random cards you have in your deck. It's kinda high concept if you really dig in, but you have these shapes that indicate different approaches to a conversation. Some characters are more empathetic and observant, while others are more brash and straightforward. Conversations flow between the different types, but you have to consider what your speaking partner has in their hand and try to anticipate a style that they're more likely to connect with. So you can try to spread your deck super thin to be the people pleaser with an answer for everything, or tailor your character to have a more dominant conversation style and either hog the conversation to yourself, or use abilities like clarification, accommodation, or reconsider your whole hand. It's very poetic in a way, and the conversations react naturally to you drawing a bad hand or being unprepared to talk to someone with an unfamiliar personality. The story has you inheriting a storefront and shipping job from your late mother, so your job is to chat up the merchants and get them to sell their wares at your store. But you can't do everything in one trip, and you won't quote-unquote win every conversation. Doors open and close, choices are made, life happens, and sometimes you just miscommunicate with people. But you learn something from everyone you talk to, and eventually become more equipped to have more complicated conversations. But being away from home causes you fatigue, so by the end of a long caravan trip, you're too exhausted to hold a conversation or put up with pleasing everyone. There are so many fun twists, and I was instantly enamored with maximizing my deck to talk with everyone I could. And that's not even to mention the stellar art direction and music. The whole package has a fresh Central American Wild West flair, and the characters you come across all have fun personalities and branching story opportunities. It's another shorter, replayable experience with some melancholy themes, but overall Signs of the Sojourner is a very lighthearted and relaxing game that's not to be missed. Next up, I tried Islands Non-Places, and it's about as weird as it sounds. As far as art house games go, Islands is actually pretty tame and easy to grasp. It's an observational puzzle game where you spin these little dioramas around and click the light sources. It offers only the slightest bit of challenge and is as basic of a point and click as you can get, but that's fine because the experience shines in its atmosphere and audio design. As an arts graduate, I can't help but try to dissect and interpret the meaning of these scenes, but it clearly juxtaposes urban settings with nature, particularly that of a tropical jungle complete with squawking birds and humming insects. At first, the hazy lighting and emptiness felt oppressive, almost post-apocalyptic, but most of the locales were calm places of relaxation or comfort, almost nostalgic. If you enjoy casual, atmospheric puzzle games like Monument Valley or The Room, let this game just wash over you and meditate with it a little while, maybe before bed. It was a pleasant breather. Of the 3 games offered by indie publisher Graffiti Games, Mable in the Woods seemed the most intriguing. All 3 look worth picking up for sure, but a pixel art Metroidvania where you inherit the boss's powers immediately grabbed my attention. You play as an all-powerful deity summoned by a small village, but initially take the form of a small girl wielding a large sword. The writing has some dry wit and made me chuckle a few times as it's not afraid to poke fun at its own silly premise. Since you're not very strong as a little girl, you can barely move in your human form, but by transforming into a fairy or spider, you can leave your sword behind and zip around much faster. Heck, even her stone golem form is faster than her human form. Thankfully, you can summon your sword back to your side when you need to recharge your abilities, and the trajectory of your blade is actually your only means of attacking enemies in the opening. This leads to some very unique and satisfying platforming challenges, which have you darting around enemies to line up your sword slash, or maintaining your momentum like Spider-Man ducking and dodging your foes. The bosses are puzzle-like as well, and death only loses some of your currency that you can recover on respawn. In fact, the currency was the only aspect that bothered me in my early impression, because even though you have ample health, you lose so much money every time you take damage, even non-lethal. feels like it should be an either-or system. I'm glad I can earn it back by picking it all up, but in the heat of platforming it isn't fun and I mostly didn't care to recollect any of it. Hopefully it's not necessary to buy upgrades, I only stumbled across a shady potion dealer, otherwise the grind might be a bit obnoxious. The presentation is appealing, if a little simplistic, and the soundtrack was pleasing as well. My time with the game felt a little bit linear, but I was excited to dig further and unlock more transformations and search for hidden secrets. This one's got a ton of potential and left me itching for more. Puyo Puyo meets Plants vs. Zombies Gunhouse is a quirky little puzzle game that drops you right into the action. I don't know if my code just skipped over any of the story or tutorial, but I could jump right into the 6th stage and not even know how to load my weapons. Thankfully, the mechanics are simple enough to wrap your head around. It's a match 4 type game where you shift your rows from side to side to clear out or drop blocks from above to make at least 2x2 squares. You then load these blocks either to the left to make a forward-facing gun, or to the right to make a special trap of that weapon type. These range from aerial strikes to rolling beach balls to a protective barrier. Much like Puyo, the system is either seemingly random or easily manipulated depending on who's playing. I like to think that I'm a decent puzzler, but it takes a while to train your brain not to match 3 in a row and get used to the downward dropping pieces. That said, there were quite a few weapon loadouts and lots of colorful waves of baddies to take down. Even with zero strategy, the early stages barely posed a threat, but for an arcadey puzzle defender, I had a great time. I've been a Mystical Ninja fan for most of my life, particularly the N64 iterations, and Rising Dusk feels like the long-lost sequel I've been waiting for. Another pixel platformer, I hear you gripe, but this one is more of a puzzle platformer with a unique coin-based twist. Instead of mindlessly picking up every collectible in sight, Dusk penalizes you for getting greedy by causing you to fade right through any platforms with the number of coins you have or lower. This encourages more careful planning of jumps and makes coins another enemy to avoid, usually resulting in a more difficult path if you collect too many, or sometimes forcing you to restart a level entirely. Even cooler, this system offers multiple paths and replayability, earning secret collectibles, quest items, and unlocking new stages by completing levels with as few or as many coins as possible. And much like the Goemon games, there are extra side quests to earn golden cats to unlock the devious puzzle levels. These weren't too bad so far, but really test your observation and planning skills trying to anticipate how many coins you need to progress without screwing yourself over. The pixel art is colorful and varied, and the soundtrack is a catchy lo-fi take on traditional Japanese music. This one's a bit more on the relaxing side and not too demanding, so I definitely recommend this one to everyone. I figure this one's appropriate for the bundle. Tonight We Riot is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you lead a swarm of the masses to deliver your own brand of civil disturbance to the bigwigs of a RoboCop-esque dystopia. While more of a social commentary on capitalism and workers' rights, Riot's tone is intentionally tongue-in-cheek cheesy, but it's still a topic that hasn't been explored much in gaming. The game mostly uses that concept as a backdrop and excuse to have you control a mob of characters fighting another mob of enemies. You're kitted out with bricks, wrenches, and molotovs, while the law enforcers have hoses, chainsaws, and fist-flying mecha cops. It seems a bit unfair if you ask me. And the game is pretty ruthless too. I was getting wiped out multiple times in the first world. You really have to strategize and work quickly to keep your little squad of disgruntled pig people alive. You can vaguely position them around your cursor, but they kinda do their own thing and I didn't feel like I had much control. The music is just as oppressive as the imagery and not really my cup of tea. Hopefully the real world won't come to this because I wasn't the biggest fan. Beacon's a sci-fi roguelite action game where you're an intergalactic badass Freya Akiyama. Or you would be a badass if you hadn't died in a horrific crash on a hostile planet. That would make it for a pretty short game, so thankfully you take control of one of Freya's indeterminate number of clones that have landed all over the place. It's now your mission to get further than the last clone and reach your ship's, you guessed it, distress beacon. But warring factions of robots and bugs intend to keep you down, so you gotta hunt for weapons to even the odds. The coolest collectibles in Beacon are the genetic material you can sometimes scavenge off enemies. Not sure what kind of DNA Freya scrapes off these robots, but they've got them. When a new clone is spawned, you can choose to splice in some of these genes to beef up your stats and unlock crazy mutations. Immediately after the tutorial, poor Freya Mark I here's spine burst into flames, electricity blew her legs apart, and she had to amputate her left arm. Not a successful start. I also lucked out by having nearly 250% speed in the pitch black narrow landscape, and touching a single flame would nearly tick away my entire health pool. Needless to say, I had an uphill battle with my first few runs. The game plays like a twin-stick shooter with light exploration, puzzle solving, and even some platforming. The weapon variety was fun, and there were tons of weird alien abilities like slime bombs and swarms of hatchlings. After my initial terrible loadout, I found myself getting sucked into the progression loop once I started discovering more helpful weapons. I didn't quite understand how to change my mutations though, since they seemed locked unless you started over completely from scratch. Maybe that's just the risk versus reward, but I would have liked an easier way to mix and match and try out new abilities while still keeping some permanent progression. The fights can get a little chaotic on the tiny claustrophobic platforms with all these particles flying everywhere, but I can see this one having a lot of addicting potential. When you can actually see where you're going, the game looks great and the moody ambient sound design sells the desolate sci-fi aesthetic, and that's where Beacon really shines. Kinda bummed with this one, to be honest. The Land of Glass looked like a maybe deck-building tactics game, but it feels more like Gwent meets Super Smash Bros. The game features a surprising amount of story with 4 unique campaigns, from the religious holy war and politics of this Anubis tribe to Radagast the Frog and his idiot salamander friend playing with woodland creatures. The narrative really runs the gambit. What immediately stands out is the stellar stained glass art design. It really kept my attention where the story and gameplay didn't. Combat is this frantic mess of attack and defense. You slot red cards into your opponent's grid to reduce their shields and blue to increase your own. You try to break holes in their defenses, and any leftover damage hits their life points and causes them to get knocked back. The loser either runs out of health or is knocked off the platform. You're encouraged to move your cards as quickly as possible, so it's less about strategy and more about good hand-eye coordination, because it's easy to put the cards in the wrong slots and mess up your timing. I found just wailing away at enemies to be pretty effective, and while the spells I unlocked seemed to have some potential, the core gimmick just wasn't that compelling, and neither were the characters. Who knows, the writing might be really endearing eventually, but I wasn't thrilled with the prospect of endless shoving matches. Underhero was a surprising blend of action RPG and platformer, fairly reminiscent of the Mario and Luigi RPGs. You play as a nameless grunt who accidentally kills the hero before he has a chance to face off against your boss, the nefarious Mr. Stitches. To keep the ordeal under wraps, Stitches sends you out to essentially reset the typical video gamey quest by returning the MacGuffin gems to their respective bosses and then most likely having you disposed of. Luckily, you befriend the hero's magical hilt, who tasks you with becoming a hero yourself and secretly rising up against Mr. Stitches. The writing is pretty clever and gives its background characters a lot of personality a la the Mario RPGs. The combat is a cooldown-based fighting system that almost reminds me of Indivisible. Swinging your weapons takes stamina that slowly refills, but well-timed dodges gives you a boost of energy. You can shield parry if you're too exhausted to dodge and use heavier ranged attacks to counter different enemies. The upsetting part is that you essentially have to beat up on your unwitting comrades. You can even chat with them and get helpful tips before wailing on them as thank you. It feels messed up. The platforming is serviceable, but with some nice quality of life additions. Your character can float to descend and often completely bypass some platforming, but it doesn't feel too cheap. There's also this death fog that looms over spikes and pits that you can't see. It's kind of an ugly effect, but I appreciate knowing where unseen dangers are with so much vertical platforming. Combat feels rewarding, and it pulls inspiration from a lot of my favorite Mario RPGs with good secrets and mostly good writing. Underhero was another game that was hard to put down. Whew, how many are we doing? Is anybody still watching? Seriously, I could go on and on for hours, but that should give you some good places to start or help whittle down the games that seem worth checking out. Again, there are too many great games to mention, and tons of them just aren't in my wheelhouse, so really take your time and give some of these games a look. I'll tell you, I was consistently pleased with just about everything I tried. Even the ones I wasn't so hot on had a lot of interesting ideas and surprises. So many of these games I want to go through and finish now, and that's not even touching the more high-profile games. If you weren't able to grab this bundle, I hope you were able to see how impressive this collection was and feel inspired to support the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Community Bail Fund, or these awesome developers. If you can't, then I hope to see you on social media and out in the streets raising awareness because the road to equality is far from complete. And I also hope you beautiful people have a wonderful summer and play some good indies. Damn, I've got to finish Bug Fables too, and there's that update for Children of Morta, and Griffland's Early Access just came out yesterday, and there were so many cool games in the PS5 presentation, and the Guerrilla Collective shows, and the PC...